Welcome back to Mixed Story Time with Miss McMahon. Well, girls, I have another fabulous Apple book that I'd like to share with you. It's one of my favorites. And it's called Mr. Brown's Magnificent Apple Tree. Now, what does magnificent mean, you say? Well, magnificent means something that is exceptional, big, awesome, great, okay? So, we're going to read about Mr. Brown's magnificent or awesome, great, big apple tree. But first, before we start, you might notice some apples. We're going to do a little counting with these apples during our story. And after our story, we're going to do a quick little activity that you can do and join in with Miss McMahon, or you can do it after we share story time together with your mommy and daddy. Because in your take-home bag, you will notice you have an apple tree page with some spots to put some apples. And our apples happen to be pom-poms, so if you have some of those handy, that would be great. And there's some number cards with some apples on it that should have been in your take-home bag. If you want to play along with Miss McMahon, that's great. If not, you can do it with your mommies and daddies later on, or you can just count along with me. All right, well, let's get started with Mr. Brown's Magnificent Apple Tree. Now, the person who wrote this story, girls, when we talk about someone who writes a story, it's called the author, okay? Now, the person who draws the pictures in the story is called the illustrator. The person who wrote this story, his name is Yvonne Weiner. That's their name, her name. And the person who made the pictures or drew the pictures, the illustrator, her name is Maya Winters. All right? So, let's see what happens to Mr. Brown's magnificent apple tree. Mr. Brown had a magnificent apple tree. On this tree hung 5 ripe red apples. Let's count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we've got 5 apples right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Each day, Mr. Brown went out to count the apples. And we've counted them, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ripe red apples. But one night, a tiny gray mouse ran up the trunk of the tree. Tip-tap, tip-tap, tip-tap. She chewed through the stem of one apple. Nibble, 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 nibble. And plop! It fell to the ground. Plop! It fell to the ground where the mouse family was waiting. Nibble, 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 nibble. The mouse family soon ate up every piece of the apple and then scampered back home. Oh. They ate the apple up. Nibble, nibble, nibble. Now, girls, are there 5 apples anymore? I don't think so. Look what happens. The next morning, Mr. Brown came out of his house and counted the apples. Let's count them. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh! 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, only 4 apples. A tall, tall thief must have come in the night and stolen my apple, he said. He went back into his house, very puzzled. Okay, that means very confused. What happened to my apple? It's missing. So late that night, when everything was quiet, the tiny gray mouse ran even further up the tree. And remember what he makes the sound? Tip, tap, tip, tap, tip, tap. And she chewed through the stem of another apple. Oh no! What's going to happen? And plop! It fell to the ground, didn't it? Just like that other apple. Plop! Down to the ground. Oh, nibble, 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 nibble. The mouse family soon ate up every piece of that apple and then scampered back home. Uh-oh, we're missing another apple, aren't we? So the next morning, Mr. Brown came out of his house and counted the apples. How many do we have left now, girls? 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Only 3 apples left. Oh, an even taller thief must have come in the night and stolen my apple, he said. He went back into his house, very puzzled. Who did it? We know. So that night, guess who comes back? You got it. The gray mouse, right? When everything was quiet, the tiny mouse ran up the trunk of the tree even further up than the night before. Ready? You can say it with me. Tip, tap, tip, tap, tip, tap, tip, tap. She chewed through the stem of another apple. What's going to happen? And what, girls? And plop! Oh, it fell to the ground where the mouse family was waiting. Oh, the mouse family soon ate up every piece of that juicy apple and scampered back home, right? Oh, no more apple. Another missing apple. Guess he's going to come back out and count. Mr. Brown, the next morning, he came out of his house and counted the apples. How many do we have left, girls? 1, 2. 1, 2. Only 2 apples left. Oh, no. I can't believe it. I think a giant must have come in the night and stolen my apple, said Mr. Brown. Was it really a giant? Just those tiny little mice. So what is Mr. Brown going to do? So Mr. Brown, he wanted to see that giant thief who had stolen his apples. So that night, after it was dark, he crept out of his house. He hid behind a bush and he waited. And when everything was quiet, the tiny mouse ran up the trunk of the tree. And we know what it does, what the noise is. Tip tap, tip tap, tip tap, tip tap. She chewed through the stem. And what? And Mr. Brown watched in amazement and plop! It fell down to where the mouse family was waiting. Nibble, 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 nibble. The mouse family soon ate up every piece of that apple and then scampered back home. And Mr. Brown went back into his house, shaking his head. My goodness, it was not a tall thief. It was just a tiny little mouse. And the mouse family ate up all his apples. Well, guess what? Not all his apples are eaten. How many do we have left? 1 apple left. And what is Mr. Brown going to do? So the next morning, he got out the ladder, he climbed up and picked that last apple, and he ate every last piece of it. And that night, the little mice peered out of their holes and squealed, "A giant has stolen our last apple!" Oh! To the mice, he was a giant, Mr. Brown. But the mice were not giants like Mr. Brown thought. They were just little mice scampering up the tree and eating his apples. And Mr. Brown finally got the last apple. Are there any more apples on the tree? No more apples on the tree. 0 apples on Mr. Brown's magnificent apple tree. Now, ladies, that was a really great story, wasn't it? And that story reminds me of this apple tree that we have here that was in your take-home bags, and a little game that we can just quickly play. And it goes with these cards. There's some numbers and some apples on them, and it goes with these pom-poms. Okay, I'm going to show you how to play this game, and you can play it later with your mom and dad. Okay, we're going to just go through a couple of these cards. The first card has a number on it. Now, Miss Olivia and Miss Evelyn, you might know what this number is. If you do, great. If you said number 3, you are right. This is the number 3. Now, if you don't recognize this number, you can always count the number of apples on the card. Okay? So let's count together. Ready? 1, 2, 3 red apples, just like on Mr. Brown's magnificent apple tree, right? So you got number 3. That was the first card we picked. So you take your pom-poms and you put 3 apples on your tree in the circles. 1, 2, and 3. Good job, ladies. I bet you did that magnificently. All right, here's the next number. It's, if you said number 1, you're right. We can count the apples too. 1 apple. Perfect. So you get one of your pom-pom apples and you put it on your apple tree. Oh, here's a big one, girls. All right, this is a big number. We might have to count the apples. Okay, let's count them together. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 red apples. That's a lot. We're going to have to count lots of red pom-poms and put them on our tree. A 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, a 5, a 6. After 6 is 7, and after 7 is 8. Our card is almost full, girls. All right, let's see. Let's pick another number. I'm going to shuffle them up. Oh, here's one. Wait a second. Did you say 0? Do you see any red apples on here? I don't see any either. Are we going to put any more apples on our tree? Because that's 0. There is nothing. So we don't put any more apples with 0. Oh, we're going to have to pick another number. All right. Oh, this is a good one, ladies. And this reminds me of Mr. Brown's magnificent apple tree. How many apples did Mr. Brown start off with at the beginning of his story? I think you guessed it. If you guessed and see the number 5, you're right. Let's count the apples. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and add 5 more apples to our tree. Let's count together. 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and after 4 is 5. Oh my goodness, ladies. We filled up our whole card with apples. Perfect. Now, you can try this at home with your game that you have. You can also start with all apples on your board, and whatever number you have, you can take away, just like in Mr. Brown's magnificent apple tree. So number 5, if our board is full, you can take 5 away. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and take away until you have 0 left on your tree, like Mr. Brown. All right, girls. Well, thank you for joining me for mixed story time and our fun activity. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye for now.